All right, so squats are oftentimes looked at as kind of a main key exercise, and if people don't have them in their programming, they're deemed to be deficient. Now, I do love squats, but at the same time, they need to be performed correctly, and I find a ton of faulty mechanics when I'm going through looking at somebody's squat form. So let's go ahead and break it down just from the bottom all the way up. Really look at the details of a squat and keep these things in mind. I always want people to be mindful as they go through their exercises. We're not just simply going through a movement and adding some weight to it. We're really trying to elicit a specific response, and that may be increasing load to increase strength, or there are times when we're really just trying to work on repatterning, so cleaning up poor motor patterns. So we start looking at the squat, a couple of things. Your stance width, we're gonna go a little bit wider than hip width. So if I start at hip width and then maybe about half of my foot width wider than that, that's probably gonna be a good position. Ideally, we'd like to have your toes square, but a little bit of outward toe turn's okay, and just a smidge of outward knee turn is going to be okay. Now, there are a lot of variations for other specific reasons. This is simply how I want you to do your squats. There are cases where, depending on the structure of somebody's hip joint, we may need to take and externally rotate them a little bit further, but that's stuff that we figure out through movement screening. All right, so starting square. Next thing I'm thinking about, there's a line going across my shoulders, a line going across my waist. Both of those are parallel to each other and parallel to the floor, and we need them to stay that way the whole time through. The next line I'm drawing from the middle of my stance straight up. I want to make sure equal things are going on the left side and the right side as I go down into my squat and I come back up. So let's not worry too much about resistance. Let's just think about the squat mechanics. So from the front, we've got our stance. We're nice and level. And as we descend into the squat, you're going to initiate with a nice hip hinge. And what I mean by that is the first move needs to be hips back, not knees forward. So we're going to go hips back and then descend into our squat. Once we get to parallel, that's as far as you need to go, and then we come back up. So hip hinge, descend into the squat to parallel, and then come back up. From the front side, we have our hip hinge. As we descend into the squat, we're gonna make sure the knees line up with the second metatarsal. I don't mind if we angle them out a little bit. As long as you maintain tripod weight distribution through your feet, I'm gonna be a happy camper. So big toe mound, little toe mound, and your heel. Keep all those in contact. Hip hinge, descend into the squat. Knees are aligned over ankles, finding my parallel, and then coming right back up. Now, a couple of lines you can keep an eye on. The line that goes from my ankle to my knee should stay parallel to the line that goes from my hip to my shoulder. So as I descend into the squat, I'm parallel. If I'm overhinging, my torso angle is here, my shin angle is here, I'm not quite parallel. And that relationship should be maintained as we go through the squat. So hip hinge, and then keep that alignment. Oftentimes what we find are stiff ankles. So you don't have the ability to get the shin to move forward. So what people do is one of two things. They either pop the heels up to try and get down further, or they're gonna overhinge to get that perceived range of motion. In that case, you need to go with a little bit of a heel lift. So something that's maybe 1 to 2 inches high, put your heels up on that. That's gonna allow you to work on cleaner squat mechanics, but that needs to be doubled up with ankle mobility focus so that you can regain that range and get back to squatting on a nice flat surface. And when we think about low back or the lumbopelvic region, we don't want any change going on there. So sometimes I'll do a few squats, one hand on the belly button, one hand on my low back, and what I shouldn't feel is my belly button getting stretched out, and I also shouldn't feel my butt rolling under at the bottom. So hip hinge, descend into the squat. I'm still in a good position. Oftentimes we'll see people get down and then boom, they end up rotating the pelvis and going into lumbar flexion. So if you find that as you descend into a squat, there's a point where you can't control that, guess what? That's your range of motion for now. So it's far more important to maintain this position than it is to get to parallel. Hip hinge, descend, nice neutral lumbopelvic position, knees are lined up, and then right back up. Now, a couple of things you can do to get a little bit more in the way of glute activity. Before you start to go down, you're gonna try to spread whatever you're standing on apart with your feet, so it's isometric, they're not going anywhere, but as soon as I push out, boom, I can feel those glutes turn on. Once I have a little outward pressure, then I'm gonna try to unscrew the surface I'm standing on, and you'll see the knees roll out a little bit, so I'm pushing out, knees are rotating out. Once I have that and I come down into a squat, maintain that pressure, come up, and then a good squeeze in the glutes. Hip hinge, come up, good squeeze in the glutes. So, a couple of key bullet points. This is what you want to think about. A little bit wider than hip width, feet straight ahead. You're going to initiate your movement with a hip hinge, so hips back first. Then you're going to descend into your squat, maintaining neutral lumbopelvic posture, trying to find parallel unless the exercise is designated to be a short range of motion or SRAM. And then come back up. To make it a little more effective, you're going to spread the surface you're standing on with your feet, engage your glutes, unscrew, then go through your hip hinge, descend into your squat, keep that pressure, come on up, big glute squeeze at the top. So if you're really mindful of your mechanics, it doesn't matter if you're holding dumbbells down here, going with a front squat, going with a goblet squat. Occasionally we may go to some version of a back squat. So it doesn't matter how you're loading the position, the mechanics are going to be the same across the board. So remember, a squat is a squat is a squat. Be mindful of your positions, get the most out of the exercise, and minimize your injury risk.